In today's video, we are going to be making a bento box. Hi, I'm Tom and I am the Colourblind Quilter, and you are watching Behind the Block Series 1. And we are on block number 8 of this series already. Time's flown by. This is a bento box and this is a really fun block. This block builds on what we did in the last video, the log cabin, using similar construction methods to create 4 separate pieces that come together to form the final block. And again, this is a block that allows lots of different choices of colour placement to create secondary patterns, and it's lots of fun to play with it. This is block number 8 in our sampler quilt series that we're making, and if you've missed any of these videos, you can find a link to the playlist in the top corner here. There is a free worksheet for how to make this block with step-by-step instructions and diagrams that you can download in the description below, and you'll also find all the fabric requirements and cutting instructions as well, so that you can make the sampler quilt. If you want to play with colours and fabrics for the sampler quilt, you can also click on the link for Prequilt, and that will allow you to change the fabrics and colours and play with the layout of them so that you can make the sampler quilt your own. We are making just one of these blocks because it's a sampler quilt, but this block lends itself very easy to chain piecing and assembly line sewing, and I will talk a little bit more about that after we've seen how to make it. So to make this block, you are going to need, in fabric A, which is the red fabric, a 2.5 inch by 5 1/4 inch strip, and 2 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch strips. From fabric B, which is the blue fabric, you'll need 1 2.5 inch by 5 1/4 inch strip, 2 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch strips, and 2 2.5 inch by 6.5 inch strips. And then from the background, and I'm using white, you will need 2 2.5 inch by 5 1/4 inch strips, 4 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch strips, and 2 2.5 inch by 6.5 inch strips. And for this block, you will find it helpful to label your pieces so you know which piece goes where. Now in this, you'll see that it's the same block repeated 4 times, but there are 2 versions of it. We call this the A block and the B block. The A block uses the red fabric and the B block uses the blue fabric, and they're identical, just the placement of the pieces is slightly different. Again, when we make this, we're using strips to make this faster, and I have allowed a little bit of extra fabric on those strips to square up the edges so you get a nice neat cut. And you'll see as we go through this that this is very similar to making the start of the log cabin. So let's take a look and see how we make a bento box. We'll begin by making the A block by taking the 2.5 inch by 5 1/4 inch red and white strips and putting them right sides together. I use a leader when I sew to catch any thread tension issues, just to make sure there's no problems. And then I'm joining these pieces together with a careful 1/4 inch seam. At the pressing board, you're going to press towards the red fabric and just make sure not to stretch or distort it. Now at your cutting board, you're going to line it up with lines on your mat, and then you're going to take your ruler and you're just going to gently trim the edge off to square it up. And then we're going to cut 2 2.5 inch segments from this little strip. Now be sure to line up all the lines on your ruler with the seams and with the edges in the top and the bottom to get a nice straight cut. And you can see just a tiny little bit of fabric left over. Next we're going to take the 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch red strip and place it right sides together with the block, and then back to the sewing machine to join these with a 1/4 inch seam. And just be careful when you're sewing that the seam underneath does not get cut on your stitch plate like has happened to me. And you can chain piece these through, just butt the next one straight up against it and assembly line sew. Oh, and there's that seam getting caught again. And then at the ironing board, we're pressing again towards the red fabric. Now we want to take a 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch white strip, and we're going to attach it to the side, and again using the leader to catch any thread tension issues, and I'm going to assembly line sew these through. Make sure to attach this to the correct side of the block. And then you're just going to trim these apart and take them to the ironing board, where you're going to press towards the red fabric, and repeat that for the second block. And then finally take the last 2.5 inch by 6.5 inch white strip, place it right sides together, and back at the sewing machine we're just going to join these with the careful 1/4 inch seam. And again, just keeping an eye on the seams underneath, make sure that they don't get pushed in the wrong direction. If you like, you can pin these. I choose to just adjust mine and make sure that they're lining up as I sew, but it's entirely your choice. Back at the pressing board, we are going to press towards the red fabric. So set the seam and then roll it over and press nice and flat with your iron. and repeat for the second block. And there we have our two A blocks. Now we're going to make the B block in the same way. So take the 2.5 inch by 5 1/4 inch white and blue strips and join them with a careful 1/4 inch seam. At the pressing board, just press towards the blue fabric. And then take it to your cutting mat and again repeat the same steps as you did for the A block, lining it up on the lines, squaring up the edge and then cutting two 2.5 inch segments, ensuring that all the lines on the ruler are matching up with the seams, and then you just have a tiny little bit of fabric left. Now we're going to take a 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch white background strip and we're going to attach it to the bottom of this block. Again, feel free to pin or just line them up as you go. Make sure that the seam is going in the right direction underneath. And then get your second piece and butt it straight up against the first one and just sew on through. Now at the ironing board, we are pressing towards the blue fabric here, so away from the background. This is important because it will make sure that the seams nest. Take a 4.5 inch by 2.5 inch blue block and attach it right sides together with a 1/4 inch seam, being careful of the seam underneath that it doesn't get pushed in the wrong direction, and repeat for the second block. These are exactly the same steps as we took when we made the A block, we're just reversing the placement of the colours. And then we are pressing the seams towards the blue fabric again. And then finally take the last 2.5 inch by 6.5 inch blue strip and we are going to attach it again with a careful 1/4 inch seam. I'm using a 1/4 inch guide foot on my sewing machine to help keep my seam accurate. Pin if you like or just adjust as you go. When we assembly line sew, we just want to make sure that we just have everything ready to go and we just chain piece it right through the sewing machine without stopping. And then we are going to press towards the blue fabric again. Now you can see me pressing the wrong way in the video, but you do want to press towards the blue fabric and it is in the instructions on how to do it. Now take these and lay them out on your board as we prepare to sew the rows together. When you flip these right sides together, you want to make sure that those seams are nesting. And then we're just going to chain piece these. Be very careful, my sewing machine has a habit of pushing the seams in the wrong direction as they get caught on the stitch plate, and I have said it a couple of times, but just be careful of it because it did catch me out in this block and you'll see at the end where one of my seams has been pushed the wrong way. If you're not confident about nesting your seams, please do feel free to pin them, but here I'm just adjusting as I go. And my bobbin ran out of thread, so I had to change my bobbin here, which is why I had to cut threads, but I would have chain pieced these without stopping. Again, just making sure that nests nicely and then sewing on through. Now at the pressing board, we need to make sure that we press these. One seam going to the right on the top row and the bottom seam going to the left. So you're going to press towards the B block on both rows. And this will ensure that that center seam nests when we put the two rows together. So press towards the blue block both times. It's nice and easy. Make sure it's nice and flat so we get a good crisp nested seam. Now place right sides together, make sure all those seams are nesting, pin if required, and then join together. And just take your time here, make sure the seams are going in the right direction, make sure that they're nicely nested, make sure you're not getting pushed in the wrong direction by your sewing machine like that one there did. And then when you are finished, we are heading back to the pressing board for the final press. And we are going to press the seams towards the top of the block. So give them a good set with your iron and then roll it back. Finger press, make sure the seams are nice and flat. Give it a good old press there. And that's the Bento Box. Now you can see here, as I mentioned, one of my seams has been pushed in the wrong direction by my seam plate. So similar to the previous video, just snip down to the stitch line and then use your iron to press them in a direction that will help them to lay nice and flat. Give it a final press and there you have the Bento Box. So that was how to make your bento box, and it's dead simple, and as I promised you, it's exactly the same technique for the A and the B block. You just need to move the pieces of fabric into different places. Now if you wanted to make lots of these blocks, you could do strip piecing and chain piecing for this. And how I would do this is, instead of starting with the 2.5 inch by 5.25 inch strips, I would start with 2.5 inch by width of fabric strips. I would join them together, and then I would cut the entire strip unit into 2.5 inch segments. And then from there I would take a 2.5 inch by width of fabric strip, and I would attach each of these segments down that strip and then cut them up, and then just work my way around like that. Pretty similar to how you can chain piece a log cabin. Now this is a fun pattern to play with, and as I said, you can use lots of different colour choices and placements with this to get some really stunning secondary effect. So let's take a look at some example quilts that you can make using this block. So in this first example, all the blocks are orientated the same way, with the blue B block in the left corner. And it creates this kind of optical illusion looking effect where you can see a couple of different patterns jumping out at you. It's a little trippy on the eyes, but I quite like this. But it's very simple, it's very easy to do, it just requires lots of blocks laid out as they are. For our second example, we have again laid these out in rows and columns, same as the first one, but we have rotated every second block to the opposite direction. So the B block becomes the top right corner. And what you can see is it creates these shapes. They're like flowers maybe, or I don't know what shape that would be, but it creates this little repeating shape on it. You can see these 12 kind of little bubbles. Let's call them bubbles. And you can see the blue cross in the middle. And this is the same layout as the first one, but all we've done is rotate every second block. And it gives a really effective look. I like that the B block is on the outside though, because it creates a blue frame, and it also makes it look like the pattern is split and going off and continuing at the edges. I did also add a thin blue border around this as well, just to frame it, to make this design really float. Now our third example, again I've been playing with Prequilt, and I've used their magic quad feature, and what this has done is it's randomly rotated the blocks and created 4 quadrants, and it creates this kind of random looking but almost symmetrical design. It's still just using the blocks as they are, but you can see how it's grouped them together in the corners. So the corners are symmetrical, the middle of the quilt is symmetrical, and then it gives you these alternating red and blue crosses throughout the quilt. So it's quite interesting. There's a lot of movement in there, and whilst it doesn't necessarily at first glance look like it, there is a lot of symmetry, which is really cool. And I think that would be very interesting as well if you were to play with the white backgrounds and change that to maybe a third colour, and then see the effect that has in the pattern. But it just goes to show you, by just rotating some of the blocks, you can get a completely different look. Now finally, in the fourth example, I wanted to show you what would happen if you replaced one of the white backgrounds with a third colour. So in this example we have the red A block, but we've replaced the white with grey, and then we've kept the B block, which is the blue one, the same as before. And you can see now that it's creating this optical illusion effect again, and it just creates a really interesting movement through the quilt. Again, it's a little trippy like the very first example, but it just goes to show what can happen when you play with the colours, and I really quite like this, and my eye doesn't quite know where to focus on this. It keeps seeing lots of different shapes and patterns as my brain tries to make sense of it, so it's really quite interesting. Again, just something as simple as changing one of the colours, it can give a completely different look. So that was how to make a bento box, and then some examples for how you can turn that into a quilt. And I really hope you've enjoyed this video. This was video number 8 in our Behind the Blocks series, and I hope that you are following along and making these blocks at home. Don't forget, there are 2 free worksheets that you can download in the description below, step-by-step instructions for this block with diagrams, and also how to make the block in 3 other sizes, and then all the fabric requirements and cutting instructions to make the entire sampler quilt. Please do share your progress on Instagram using the hashtag BTBSeason1, and tag me, the Colourblind Quilter, so that I can follow along with your progress and see all your lovely blocks. In the next video, video number 9 in our series, we are going to be making the antique tiles block, and this is another great fun block, and there are some really lovely secondary patterns that come with this one too. If you found this video useful, please do give it a thumbs up, and if you want to get notified when I release the next video in this series, subscribe and click the bell so you'll get notified. And until next time, take care.